Doing this on behalf of Dr. Rachel Mueller, who is also on the call today, serving as a member. So wanted to quickly let everyone know that this meeting will be recorded and it will be published on the EV working group page within driveelectric.gov. If you do not wish to have your voice recorded, please do not speak during the meeting. And if you do not wish to have your image recorded, please turn off your camera or participate by phone. If you speak during the call or use a video connection, you're presumed to consent to recording and use of your voice or image. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Executive Director, Gabe Klein, for a handful of opening remarks that he'd like to cover.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, well, first of all, I just want to start by expressing my thanks and gratitude to each of you for your insight, your time, and your leadership. I know this is, this takes time, particularly, 3 meetings this month, and your participation in this working group is really invaluable to us and to the country and reflects a true commitment to advancing EV infrastructure writ large. As private sector leaders, you bring a wealth of expertise and real world perspective that's really needed to the space. It's essential as we work to develop effective and sustainable EV policies. The federal government obviously cannot do this alone, and that's why your engagement is so crucial, and that's part of the mission of the Joint Office, to bring the private sector to the table. And the knowledge, investment, innovation that's coming from you all is helping to ensure that our collective efforts in electrification are not only forward-thinking, which we care a lot about, but also scalable and resilient. So your counsel that you're giving us is helping us to keep our strategies grounded in achievable, practical goals that align with industry realities. This is a really powerful opportunity for both the private and public sectors to benefit from each other's strengths. And together, we're setting a strong foundation for the future of transportation and sustainable transportation in America. Obviously, there was an election last week, and changes in administration may bring changes in priorities. It's a natural part of our democratic process. The Joint Office, however, will continue to address these priorities across the Departments of Energy and Transportation. And the bipartisan infrastructure law is, by not just a name only, it's a fundamentally bipartisan effort that's delivering billions of dollars in investment and good paying jobs in states and communities across the country, regardless of political affiliation. And Bill was designed not as a short-term fix, but as a long-term investment in America. Solutions that make dollars and cents are inherently bipartisan. Electric mobility has unstoppable momentum globally, thanks to public and private sector alike, and all the investment that's being made across both. These investments in EVs and charging are creating good paying jobs and revitalizing communities across the country. We're here to give people meaningful choices and make sure that zero emission mobility is accessible to everybody, no matter where they live or how they get around. In times of change like this, it's the private sector's dedication and consistency that can help provide stability going forward. So your commitment to innovation, resilience, and the growth of the EV industry creates an environment of continuity that will transcend election cycles. The private sector's forward momentum in electrification is rooted in consumer demand, but also technological advancements and a commitment to global competitiveness. So our partnership remains focused on advancing EV infrastructure and accessibility, making the industry's progress a priority that benefits the economy regardless of political changes. As far as what the Joint Office has in store ahead, we're planning to award our current FOA. Communities taking charge by the end of this year. There's a big focus here in community charging, L2 deployments. We're going to keep making it easier for anyone to choose electric mobility. The J3400 connector standard and adapters will open up more charging locations for more people. And new awards in progress on awards funded by the Joint Office will advance electric mobility in key areas, including local delivery fleets, managed charging, workforce development, interoperability testing, and much more. So the recommendations put forward by each subcommittee, in my opinion, reflect an impressive level of thought, rigor, and strategic insight. It's very clear that considerable care and expertise went into these proposals to ensure they're both ambitious but also achievable. For example, I took a look at the recommendations developed by the Charging Experience Subcommittee and thought they demonstrated a really great understanding of user needs and expectations, and really went a long way to effectively addressing the real world experiences of EV drivers. The materials are not only well crafted, but also incredibly practical. So the quality of these recommendations demonstrates the impact of having the private sector at the table. And we're eager to take these recommendations forward and use them as key resources to support our mission of making EV charging an effortless and accessible part of all of our daily lives. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sarah and Scott. But again, thank you so much for everything that you've done to date and that you continue to do through the end of this term.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gabe, and have a safe flight. So let's jump in. All right, I am going to turn it over to our facilitator, Rachel Sack, and another one of our joint office team members, Senior Advisor Scott Kubley. Rachel and Scott will be leading our discussion for today's meeting. So let me hand it over to Rachel.
Great, thanks, Sarah, and nice to see everyone. We're going to go quickly through a few logistics so we can then dive in to the recommendations and our discussion for today. So just a reminder, please raise your hand when you would like to contribute to the conversation, and mute yourself when you're not talking. Many of you are on video. That's great. If you are talking and not on video, we encourage you to turn your camera on. Next slide. For today, this is the first of 3 meetings. So today we're really going to kick off the presentations from the subcommittees. I'll share my screen and ask our chairs to walk us through the documents that were shared earlier. We'd like to allow for some comments from the group. We're not going to wordsmith specifically, but hope to see what common themes come up from the discussion and if any revisions are needed. And that will take us through the series of the next 2 meetings where we hope to iterate with the goal of being able to vote on these recommendations. So at the end of today, after our public comment period, we'll ask the group, are there any recommendations you heard from the 3 subcommittees today that you would like to begin to vote on? And then we'll follow that same pattern next week after Wednesday's meeting, where we see what iterations have taken place between today and then likewise with our other meeting, which is next Friday. So we have a Wednesday and a Friday meeing next week. So that Rachel, is the...
Rachel, the slide says Thursday. Do you mind pointing out?
I know, that's why I emphasized Friday. Okay. So Wednesday is the 20th, Friday is the 22nd. That's on the agendas and in the meeting invitations that you have. So that is the course that we'll take today. And we will dive in to be able to get to some of that discussion. I think that takes us through. Are there any other slides before I share my screen? Is there a next slide? No, I think we are moving on, if I'm correct here. So we are going to first hear from the Charging Networks group, then medium heavy duty, and then grid integration. I'll pull up my screen now and share the document that is in Huddle that everyone had a link sent to. So let me just bring us over there. And then John, you can just direct me on where to focus our attention on the screen.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thumbs up. Okay, thanks, Scott, and thanks, Rachel, and to my fellow members of the EV working group. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you again, at least virtually. I know we have a lot to do and a lot to discuss, so I will try and be brief. Let me also express a quick appreciation to my fellow members of the Charging Network Subcommittee. We have had great participation. It's really been, a very, very good group discussion over a series of many months. And we had a lot to talk about. But what we're going to summarize is really two main recommendations that came out of those discussions and investigations. But before I get into it, I just want to start with the frame that this subcommittee started with. We wanted to start with the customer and work our way back. We wanted to understand what EV customers and potential customers need and want from the charging network in order for them to be happy customers successfully driving EVs, and for the private sector players in the space to have an opportunity to provide goods and services in a competitive marketplace. And so that was what was driving, our work and really animated the discussions that led to these two recommendations. So without further ado, I will start on the first, which was really like an attempt to address some, let's call it myth busting, or some perspective about the charging experience. And let me just say here that the research that we've had an opportunity to look at about customer concerns with EVs starts with this question of charging. It starts with the questions of how far does a car go on a charge if it's an EV, and how and where and when do I charge it? And so this first focused recommendation is around a public education and awareness effort on EV charging. It is literally where the electrons meet the vehicle. And so the opportunity here, we felt, was to launch a public education and awareness campaign around how it works, meaning the charging experience, and how customers can experience the benefits of an EV. In other words, the great ride and the general value of an EV through ease of charging. We modeled this idea on other public-private efforts in the past to build public awareness around either technology development or safety campaigns. Two good reference points for you might be the work of the U.S. Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration around Click It or Ticket, and the airbag and seatbelt safety campaign, where the private sector came together with the department and the agency to support seatbelt use and recognize the benefits of seatbelt, safety belt, and airbag technology. And so this idea was, and you can remember Click It or Ticket campaigns, and you could remember public service announcements and other advertisements about the benefits, or PSAs, I should say, about the benefits of airbags and seat belts. And so that was the model for this idea. And so that's the first idea. What you see on the screen were some storyboards that we had some agencies help us develop to have the subcommittee evaluate and think about the campaign. And so what you could see in this creative idea is conveying how charging is easy. it's the easiest part of driving. And you can see as you go through the storyboards that it addresses, hopefully with a little bit of humor and a little bit of perspective, some of the questions about charging. Well, you can't charge these cars. Cars don't hold a charge in cold weather, or I can't charge when it's raining, or I don't know where to find chargers, or I'm not sure how this works. And so the idea was to sort of creatively address some of those questions, or some might call them myths. I think they're fair questions. Address some of those questions in the form of a PSA. Last thing I would mention is the target. Who are we doing this for, right? Who are the targets? The idea is, yes, certainly the general public, but what we were thinking about, and we have had great, perspective from Sharkey and Andy, representing both the rental agencies and the new car dealers, that we see this as an opportunity for this to play at point of point of rental or point of sale, to help educate consumers about the ease of charging. And so that's kind of a summary of what the idea is. I would just say finally that this is an actionable recommendation, right? So going back to what Gabe said at the beginning about the charge of the committee, we did focus on things that we thought would be actionable recommendations that would take at least a meaningful step in addressing some of the questions around the EV marketplace. And so let me stop there. And I don't know, Rachel, if you want me to just go to the next recommendation, or you want me to pause here.
Let's complete your
Okay,
list,
good.
and then we'll open it up.
Good, perfect. Okay, second recommendation is around helping, again, starting with the customer and working our way back and looking at data about the charging experience, helping to ensure that the customer experience with regard to charging is a positive, good experience. It doesn't do anybody any good if an EV customer shows up at a charging point and the charging point doesn't work, or shows up at a charging point and they cannot pay, or shows up at a charging point and it's dark or feels unsafe. And so what we wanted to do is recognize the very, very good work of the Joint Office and others in developing a series of customer-facing minimum standards. And we do see these represented in, for example, the NEVI program, that address accessibility, payment, pricing, uptime, station configuration, and EV charging signage. We looked at that as a committee and we said, boy, that's a good representation from a customer's point of view of a positive charging experience. Now, we recognize that in the NEVI program, since the government is funding the NEVI program, they have the right to insist as a matter of business that those standards be met. What we thought was, well, what about the non-NEVI program, the non-NEVI charging stations that are publicly accessible, and how can we help encourage customer-facing positive experiences and outcomes there? And so what we thought about was, well, those NEVI standards should apply to the rest of publicly available charging, but should that be imposed on the private sector? Probably not. It doesn't. I'm not quite sure how one would do that. And so, there was a view among the committee that this should be about encouragement, about positivity, about carrots, encouragement. And so this idea, also actionable, and I think fairly creative, and I commend the subcommittee for their discussion and work on this, is to create effectively a race to the top, or effectively a competition among charging stations to have a positive customer experience. And again, like the first recommendation, this is not, a brilliant, absolutely unique and creative first-time idea. We see this in many other areas. For example, the NCAP program, or what's known, the new car assessment program, Cars on Stars, you might know it as. The idea there being that some entity with credibility and an understanding of technology would be able to award a seal of approval, a set of stars, a recommendation that this station, in this case, follows customer-facing standards that will help ensure a positive experience. And so that's the idea. So the audience here would be the implementing agencies of the charging infrastructure. And the idea would be, again, an encouragement process, a carrot approach that would hopefully reduce poor charging experience and encourage positive charging experiences, more uptime, ease of payment, and the like. And so that's the second idea.
Great. Thanks, John, and thanks to the subcommittee. I'm going to jump up to the first one. And again, our intent is not to wordsmith necessarily, but rather to hear from the full working group. If you have questions, if you have areas you'd like us to flag so the subcommittee can go back and revisit something. So this is our time. We'll spend a few minutes to hear from the group if you have any questions or comments or suggestions. So does anyone have anything they'd like to start with for this first item on the screen?
I'll jump in real quick. I think it's a fantastic idea. Obviously, much like our group, your breadth of reach here, from the general public to rental car customers to rental car owners to dealerships, is pretty broad. So it may require a little bit of a finessing of how we present this and where the audience comes from. But I think this is a great idea.
Great, Sharky, and then Nadia.
Yeah, Dean, I just wanted to speak to that. We talked about having little segments that can kind of plug in or plug out depending on the targeted audience. And I think the way this is configured with each of the, you can see the little segments there, a screenshot of some of the segments there. I think we can address that issue, but that's a good thing to bring up, and thank you for doing that.
Nadia?
Great concept. A lot of hard work I know went into this. Regarding the private sector partners, have you identified, I mean, I can think of some right off the top of my head, but what partners would you be looking at primarily?
Yeah, you want me to, this is John, you want me to just jump in and then I will, sort of rely on other members of the subcommittee as well. I see Andy Koblenz has his hand up. He would certainly be one of those potential private sector partners. I would not deem to or dare to commit the dealers to something, but Andy can talk to that. But what we thought about in terms of partners are companies, car manufacturers who obviously want to, especially car manufacturers that are engaged in selling battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, extended range vehicles where a plug is required, to have an easy way to help educate customers. So we see them as a potential, again, no commitments here, right? This is just, you're asking who the targets would be for private sector engagement on this. I think OEMs, potentially dealers, and Andy can speak to that, potentially rental car, the rental car agencies. I can, Sharky can speak to that. I also, would hope that maybe the charging point providers and maybe electrical utilities would see the value of of supporting a campaign like this.
Thanks. Before I go to Rakesh, Andy, was there anything you wanted to add to what John
Yeah,
said?
there actually is. I understood Nadia's question to be a little broader. And in terms of particularly the second idea, this sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval would need to come from somebody that has public acceptance. And in other words, that it's not necessarily just someone internally in the industry who's got expertise, but someone that the public would recognize. So you almost you think of a JD Power or a AAA or something like that that says, you know, these are the criteria that the charging stations meet, and so you can be assured that they work. So it would be something, the mindset would be not just technological capability, but something with a publicly recognized brand that will mean something to the consuming public.
Thanks to both of you. Helpful.
Great. All right, Rakesh.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments on the topic of the broad audience and how do we target the diversity of the audience here. We had a very similar discussion in our working group as well. And one idea was different tools depending on the different level of detail that we'd like to communicate. So just to take a couple of examples, maybe a social media type of an outreach for the highest level of information exchange only versus a webinar going into the next level of detail. And then the second comment I wanted to make is I think the theme is similar, at least in our working group subcommittee as well, excuse me. And if we can use similar type of tools across the subcommittees, that would help from an overall reach perspective as well.
Thank you. Just a few minutes left. I'll turn it over to Michael, and then we'll move on to our next group within a few minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to all the team to put both of these together. I think both ideas are very, very strong, very innovative. As we think about how we actually form the recommendation itself, this might be something we'll probably come back to, as I looked at all of them. Some are very detailed and specific, some are a little bit more broad strokes. We'll have to figure that out. I do think on the first one, it will, I think there's just a lot of need there, right? As you said, it's not really myth busting, it's consumers have questions, uncertainties, right? And so having the data and information out in front of them that say, hey, there's actually more charging than you might think. It actually works easier. It's, we know that people who buy EVs say they want to buy them again. People that haven't are really nervous about will I be able to charge it? So I think that'd be great. I do think on the recommendation, we might want to think and have some conversation about who implements, how it gets implemented a little bit. On the second one, also really, it has been powerful. I do think, like you said, the who's putting it out, and then I guess the thought I'm thinking, John, just check on is that people, it'd be out there and when we have list of chargers or other things, so consumers would know, hey, here's a 5-star charger. Man, it really has all the things. Kind of like I go to, I'm going to a 5-star, 4-star, 3-star hotel, whatever, different levels of amenities maybe and different level of experience. Is that kind of the thinking?
That's it exactly, Michael. That's it exactly, right? So it's not, this is a failure and this is a success. It's, right. It's there's good, better, best. There's 3, 4, 5 stars. There's just like the NCAP program works, the new car assessment program for safety. So yes, that's the idea, which is why we called it a competition to the top.
One idea I would maybe add in to interject a little bit, this might be like a phase 2. I've heard a number of people comment that level 1, level 2, level 3 DC fast charger, I don't understand any of this stuff, right? That's not like typical average consumer ease. If there's a way with this as well, so people know, oh, it's a 5-star this or that, how it ties to their vehicle, we've all heard stories of people have shown up at, oh, I showed up at the charger and I thought it was my charger. I didn't realize that this level 2 thing is different, or, there might be something like that too, where it's, people then can associate with what meets their car's needs, if you will, or what works for them. So.
It's a great point. I've had that experience myself. So like, I think making sure that customer expectations are aligned with the type of charging, right? You're not going to charge in 15 to 20 minutes in an L2. So level 2. Yes.
Great, thank you. Sharky.
Yeah, Michael, great point. Seconding that, I had a thought if we wouldn't be better served talking about a 15-minute charge, a half-hour charge, an hour-long charge. Now, I recognize the target's moving a little bit because there are some reported technologies that anticipate faster charging times, but I think that's easier for the public to just talk about what the core concern is, which is how long is it going to take versus this abstracted version of it, level 1, level 2, level 3, or God forbid, talk about kilowatts or some other technical term that's just going to lose everybody. I don't know how easy it is to get there, but I've brought that up before, and I think that would be easier for the public to understand, even if we didn't get it exactly right.
Great. So before we move on, I guess, John, I'll go back to you in the subcommittee. Any final thoughts that you want to add? And then we will, to Michael's earlier point, we'll talk about process and how this package ends up looking, especially when it comes time to what are you voting for. But before that, John, any final thoughts on what you've heard?
No, I think the feedback is great. And, we will, internalize that into our subcommittee conversations, but I think it's been a pretty robust conversation, and I appreciate Sharky, Andy, and the rest of the subcommittee for their engagement today and support throughout the discussions.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. That was a great discussion on those 2 items. So now we're going to switch gears to the medium and heavy duty group, and I'll share that document. We're going to go through the same process, an overview, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. So I'll turn it over to Dean.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank John and Nadia. We've had a great crosstalk between the subcommittees. I think we've done a really good job of aligning what we're working towards. We've all agreed that these are the first steps of where we want to go. This is not policy recommendations. These are not budgetary concerns. These are new funding mechanisms, which we think will take a bigger bite and are down the road. But these are first steps that we say, okay, if we're going to level set and we want to make a difference, or at least make an impact on the current state of affairs, these are our steps we can take. I do want to thank the whole subcommittee. I mean, Rakesh and Mike and Denise and Laura and everybody who's participated. It's been great. We've had the expertise we have in the subcommittee is great. So we're going to make it a little bit more complicated when you talk about medium duty, heavy duty EV charging, electrification, whether it's battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell. The first thing to understand, we think, when you talk about trucks and EV charging, is total cost of ownership. That's the first place we'd like to level set, because it's no longer just how much does this new EV car cost? How much is my gas going to be? There's a much more complex relationship. And then if you look at the OEMs, to the truck purchaser, to the fleet owner, to the infrastructure provider, to the energy provider, it's a very complex system that is very impactful. I mean, this country relies on trucking to move our goods around. And if we want to really make a difference on the decarbonization efforts or to the bottom line of these fleet owners, we really need to talk about total cost of ownership. Much like John was talking about, this is a public education and outreach that we think is a very good placeholder, whether it's social media or webinars or speeches at truck events. I think we really need to hit total cost of ownership. It's not just what does the truck cost you and what is the fuel cost. It's going to be more about the design of the battery and the size of the battery, the long-term insurance cost, the operational cost on a per mile basis. How are you going to use this battery electric truck, how far can you go? Can you go over the road? Is it always just a sleeper cab? Maybe it's not a sleeper cab. What about maintenance servicing costs that need to be associated with maintaining these long-range trucks that drive millions of miles? What about the depreciation of the vehicle over the life and its afterlife value? A truck, you don't just buy it and then trade it in for a new truck. You have a residual value of the truck. And what is that residual value? What is the residual value of the battery? Fuel costs vary significantly based on use case. If you're going to do a depot operation and always charge the truck at your depot, that's one thing, because then you can manage the charge and you can manage when you charge it. But now if you start talking about long haul trucking, where the fuel costs are dependent upon what you're going to get out in the wild, we call it in the wild, but what's being charged in the wild, your fuel cost may not be known. So that's a big thing. And then the weight trade-offs, that gets more into some of the weight trade-offs and refueling times. That really gets into the what type of technology you're using. How much do the batteries weigh? How much is that going to impact how much load I can carry? How does that impact the operational model? And then obviously the refueling time. It could be a game changer for some of these trucks going long haul. If I have to sit for 2 hours and refuel a truck, it's a bigger deal. These costs are also not static. They are changing, I don't want to say on a daily basis, but they're definitely changing on a monthly basis based on technology and costs. So our first goal is to get that message out there that here are the considerations. Here, when you start talking about a big impact item like trucks, here are the things you need to consider. Number two is more about industry engagement on what a truck means. When I say a truck, it could mean lots of things. It could mean a Class 8 sleeper cab. It could mean my pickup truck in the driveway there. It could mean a refuge truck. So really, we want to make sure that we have a level set playing ground on what do we mean when we say Class 6 to Class 8. That could be all the way from an Amazon or last mile delivery van, all the way up to a Class 7 or a Class 8 truck that just goes back to depot. Maybe it's a refuge truck. And then it could be a sleeper cab. And then it could be based on the use case. It also could be a bus. Maybe it's a public bus. That's a Class 7, Class 8 vehicle. So there's such a wide range of meanings when you talk Class 6 to Class 8, from size to use case to the range to who operates it. Is it a government operator? Is it a city operator? Or is it a fleet operator? So, and the answers to some of the questions about how you drive some of these initiatives, whether it's policy or funding mechanisms, this discussion really, really matters. So we would also like to include, as part of that public outreach to the planners, to the industry partners, I would also include the general public so they understand the complexity of the trucking industry. We get it out there in some of these various common forms that we've been talking about on how you do outreach. Number three, I'm going to kind of tread on Nadia's game plan here a little bit. Sorry, Nadia. But utility load planning and data transparency. Obviously, we're no longer talking about a 150 kilowatt charger or even a 350 kilowatt charger. Sometimes we're talking about a 750 kilowatt charger or a 1 megawatt charger. And you could have several of them. You may need 10 to 20 megawatts instantaneously at these sites. So as we all know, and those of us in this space, even in California where they're leading the way, it's really, really hard to understand what power may be available. Even right now, I know there are some tools out there, but they're not standardized. And how do you plan for it? If I want to build outside of San Francisco, I want to build a power station that's going to suffice to get all the power I need for some of these trucks. How do I engage with the utilities? When do I engage with the utilities? And is it going to be a 3-year process to get the power out there, which really, really would be bad? So we would like, one, some data transparency. How is the load being planned? What is planning available? Where's power available now to put a depot and maybe on the road where power will be available? And then secondly, we'd like to proactively look at load planning for the utilities, working together with them to say, can you use some tools like the EPA has to maybe pre-plan where the power is going to be delivered, not just waiting for an application from a user, but pre-plan. The next one is more about outreach. And this goes back to what Rakesh was saying. It's no longer just outreach and education to the bottom level, not just the OEMs and the truck users. It's not the general public. There's a layer in there that we need to reach: policymakers, budget makers. I would say Michael, but he understands the concepts. But some different levels of people who need to understand the complexities of this. Is the second tier. We call it the second ring of people we need to reach. So make sure we understand that there are different levels of users that need different levels of engagement. Really think that second level is really, really important. And the last one is to not forget some of the ongoing technologies, whether they're being developed, whether they're being researched, the 28 to 30 technologies, maybe the 28 to 2035 technologies like hydrogen fuel cell. We need to make sure we promote research into those technologies. Don't forget the fact that battery electric, although that's what seems to be focused on right now, those hydrogen fuel cells, or what is next, may be a viable technology that we need to keep our eye on.
Great. So 5 recommendations here, and I don't know if we'll be able to dig deep into all of them. So if we don't get to everyone's comments, certainly we want you to go back into this document and add there as well. But let me start from the top, I guess, and we can work our way down. We'll spend just a few minutes on each. So for this first item of total cost of ownership, any comments or questions for the subcommittee here? Cassie.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Dean, for the overview and for the recommendations. These are excellent and are quite comprehensive, so great job. A question on number 1 is, I know that Department of Energy and others have developed materials on total cost of ownership and have been working with fleets for a while to enhance their understanding, and I'm just wondering your thoughts on how this recommendation could scale those efforts or really help to advance them beyond what's already happened.
That's a great question. One, I think the EV working group, I hate the word stamp of approval because it sounds like we're just rubber stamping something that's already out there. But I think the EV working group weighing in as part of the joint office actually can put that stamp of approval. I'm going to defer a little bit to Rakesh. I know Rakesh, you worked on this quite a bit. Rakesh, do you have some words on this?
Yeah, and I would add the other topic is really, it's not so much to reinvent a cost of ownership tool. Several of those exist, as you noted as well. I think NREL has just published or updated their tool in the last few weeks, but it's more around assumptions, what goes into the tool. So I think that'll be a very healthy discussion for our subcommittee and the EV working group to have in terms of assumptions that go into the tool. And energy cost is one of the first and foremost that comes to mind. It has such a dominant influence on the cost of ownership and how we charge, where we charge, whether it's a depot setting, public setting, time of use and demand charges, which state we are charging in. That can introduce a very broad sort of set of parameters, a range of parameters around the cost of ownership. So for us to align and get a handle on that and align on the assumptions around energy costs, for example, would be a very beneficial exercise in my opinion.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I just have a couple questions about all the public education and outreach suggestions here. It strikes me that this is very different from the one that we were talking about first, where we have a public that is often uninformed or unaware of the issues that we were talking about. what I'm really asking is who is the object of this education? The fleet operators don't need to be educated about the total cost of ownership. They know that every day. So who is it that we're educating, and to what end is that education? I guess those are my questions about it. I agree with all the analysis that you have behind it, but who are we educating, and to what end?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I can almost hear Rakesh's answer, but I really want to hear what Rakesh has to say because he's really in the middle of it. But I might say you'd be surprised at how the fleet owners don't know the total cost of ownership on some of these new technologies like battery energy trucks, or the future technologies, whether it's renewable diesel, renewable natural gas. Some of those have been around for a little bit. This is brand new. So I would say the fleet owners, but all the way down. I mean, I think the OEMs are starting to get it. They can drive this discussion. But when you go to the individual truck owner, when you buy a truck, or the fleet owner, or even the infrastructure providers, they need to understand this. And that's part of the reach. The second part of the reach is the policymakers who are actually going to drive this initiative. Rakesh?
Yeah, no, I think you summed it very well. And I appreciate the question as well, because when we first, in one of the initial drafts of this document, the term we were using was myth busting. And I also suggested maybe we should look at an alternative phrasing, because as you noted, a lot of the stakeholders, they're not dealing with myths in this space, at least. They're fairly well informed. They know their business. So it's not so much that we are busting myths in the medium and heavy duty space necessarily, but still, to Dean's point, as you look across the spectrum, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to just align on the set of assumptions, set of forecasts, and be better informed on this topic.
Okay, Michael, and then we're going to move on to our next recommendation. Go ahead.
I appreciate all the thought from the team here. As we're looking at these and listening to the conversation and rereading them a few times now, it strikes me you might be able to kind of form these into like two types of recommendations. There's one that sounds like there are some tools needed for people that might be buying, electrified hydrogen vehicles, trucks. So a tool to understand the total cost of ownership, that have common understanding and agreement, tool on the load factor. And then there sounds like there's a second part that is aimed more at utilities largely, or maybe infrastructure developers or things like that, understanding these are the unique needs and operational patterns of medium and heavy duty trucks. These are how they work. Here's how long haul works. Others like, so it's aimed at those people. And it might be helpful to think of this as like, we take these and break them into those two groupings. That might clarify a little bit this question of who's the audience and what is the thing that is the recommendation in there. But and support of all the others, the R&D work absolutely, I think, is also a very good recommendation. And there are some things and I will say, just there are some things that exist, like tools like this, but they don't quite maybe meet the mark. It's a little what I'm hearing too. They don't have the visibility or the imprintor or the breadth or the full, like kind of really elevating, like this is the key tool everyone recognizes as well done, well vetted, well researched, people can really trust. Maybe helps, and coming out of this group maybe helps that.
Thank you. Okay, are there any comments or questions on recommendation 2? And then we'll talk about some of the best practices.
I'll just jump in real quick, understanding that some of Michael's comments and some of the other questions, which were fantastic, probably apply to number 2 also.
I will say I was referring to all of them as a group, just sorry.
Yeah, and I think with all the recommendations overall, I imagine this group will navigate how to package it together with communication and engagement and these tools and operational items. Any questions or comments on 2 or 3?
Rachel, I have one. This is Nadia. I have one on 3. I couldn't find my little hand to raise it, so I went old school. So on 3, and I think it might also go into 4. Let's see, maybe it's really 3. Dean, thank you. Yes, there's certainly some overlap with what you'll see coming from the grid subcommittee that will be the grid interconnection subcommittee that will be following. And so one point I would highlight is just we can work to harmonize these too, because there is such overlap. I also think that the audience would need to include, as we're thinking about some of this, you know, of course, regulators, the state regulators, the state's CASI, you know, energy offices. There's a lot of those folks that are critical at the decision-making levels, right? When we're talking about planning and what a utility can and cannot do. So I would just add that, but I think there's a good opportunity to sync these up, and we're seeing some reoccurring themes here. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments from the group? I'll continue to scroll down, but you can direct me elsewhere. So we had the best practices for the utility load, and then the best practice here on the public education element, and then the final best practice on research. So any comments on any of these or questions? John?
Yeah, just one, you know, I love all of this. One supportive comment on, if you could scroll back up on the sort of load, you know, sort of planning, and, you know, sort of the proactive planning. That's the phrase. Sorry, I was looking for the this work that's being done in the medium duty, heavy duty sector is most important there because the loads are greatest, but they support they support also the build out of, you know, grid capability and charging networks for the light duty fleet as well. So like, I'm just want to make just a general comment that work is leadership work that supports market readiness for EVs broadly, right? Because, you know, your load is a big driver early, you know, and that helps build out, you know, grid capacity and the charging network for the light duty fleet as well. So, you know, I just want to add that point.
Nadia?
And one other item on the topic, I think vis-a-vis, and it may be implied there, but the EPRI is a great example of this. EVs to scale is one good example where there's data that is being shared, because a lot of times the patterns of use, you know, where the fleet vehicles are dwelling, their routes, that type of data may rest with the OEMs, it may rest with the fleet manager and operator, and or both. And so having a way to have line of sight into that, I think will be very helpful and an important piece of any planning, right? Because regulators, anybody's gonna ask, you know, how do we know where these vehicles are going to be, and what's the certainty of them actually being there? And, you know, there's a lot of questions that can be asked. So I would just note that as well.
Great, thank you. Rakesh?
I'll keep this really brief. To John's point, I fully agree. Heavy duty needs can absolutely support light duty needs. The reverse is not necessarily true, as we found time and time again. But on the heavy duty infrastructure side, the goal ought to be dual purpose that can support light duty as well. And Nadia, to your point, I think there is a lot of data available. We have collaborated with EPRI and other organizations to make that data available. One of the next steps for our group to consider would be, what is then the outcome, right? If one of the gaps, just to make a point here, the timelines we are looking at for vehicle availability, if those are in production, are a few months. Infrastructure build out can take several years. So as we use the data available and anticipate the demand, what kind of policy recommendations can come in place to support then the build out of that infrastructure that takes several years?
Great, thank you. I'll also note, just for everyone's awareness, the great comments that you are adding to our discussion are obviously being recorded for the meeting, but also written down behind the scenes so that when we come back to your subcommittees, you have a little more meat on the bone that you can play with as you work to iterate. So I think we're going to wrap this up. Thank you, Dean, and thank you to your subcommittee for these 5 recommendations. Some great comments here as well. So now we'll turn over to the Grid Integration Subcommittee and hear your presentation for your 2 recommendations.
Well, Rakesh, you kind of teed us up perfectly, and Dean, but with Rakesh's comments. So first of all, just want to likewise thank the Grid Integration Subcommittee members and the working group, and then of course the Joint Office's support along the way. We have 2 recommendations that we'll be sharing with you. First one, again, right on point, is proactive infrastructure investments. And we took a step back and to the point that we started our first subcommittee talked about thinking through the customer's lens. And when you think through the lens of a customer, as well as a utility, I will say, or a power provider, things like affordability, safety, reliability are king, right? Are paramount. So we understand that to effectively and efficiently prepare for the new load that's coming from the kind of grid planning side, there is a desire to explore how can we become more proactive versus reactive, as was discussed. And great points about the demand that medium and heavy duty charging, particularly fleet depots, can bring on, a large amount of demand in a short, in a concentrated area. But also just with light duty vehicles and passenger vehicles. So across the board, thinking about where do we know there will be adoption or we feel fairly certain, and how do we take that information and make it actionable? So what we've heard, you'll see here, that's the issue. What we've heard is that there's always some challenges where various parties are concerned about authorizing investments, making investments in the grid. For example, if we don't have certainty, if we don't have, it's not like the situation where historically there was known and identified demand that was typically very locationally specific and didn't move around. And so the challenge is, how do we adapt to this new environment and make sure that we're making wise investments and, try to lay aside and minimize concerns about investments that could, become stranded or not, used and useful as the terminology, the utility terminology often reflects. So we also have heard that in some regions that there's concerns about the disconnects in the timeline. Rakesh, you raised that. Dean, you raised that. And all of that has led the Grid Integration Subcommittee to propose that we really lean in, and I'll jump into the proposed solution, have federal, state, utility, and other key decision makers come forward. And of course, other key decision makers and entities can include, auto OEMs, the, operators, the universe we've been talking about, but work to develop improved data and forecasting practices and mechanisms that can help us, better understand and distribute the risks and appropriate approaches to proactive investments. And thinking about how we can also enable efficiencies. We'll talk about our second recommendations because our second recommendation ties into managed charging, which can also, obviously influence how much you need to build, when and where. And so that is our proposed solution. Our call to action has 4 components here. One is we want to develop new and improved data modeling and frameworks that can better predict infrastructure and investment needs. 2, building consensus as needed, as well as confidence among the key stakeholders, whether that be the auto OEMs, the utilities, investors, regulators, policymakers. You know, there's quite a few stakeholders out there regarding the risk profile of projected EV market developments and needs. 3, identifying innovative mechanisms that government, whether that's federal, state, and or local, and industry can develop to manage risks of proactive grid investments. And then finally, are there our 4th category of funding needed to execute these strategies, whether that's some type of a, you know, loan guarantee or a guarantee or backstop, or, you know, whatever it might be. One example is for those actual upgrades. So that is our call to action. I will move on to our second recommendation, because I think we're supposed to go through both before we open it up for comments. And this ties into managed charging, as I noted. I think everybody knows what managed charging is. I say that there are various definitions, right? So that is something we talked a lot about. But at a very basic level, thinking about managed charging as shifting vehicle charging to times that avoid grid constraints or reduce the curtailment of intermittent clean, you know, renewable resources, for example, that can help mitigate grid congestion, investments, more efficiently utilize the grid, and ultimately help, you know, with affordability for not only EV users and drivers, but the general utility customers at large. And we know that there have been a lot of pilots done across the country with different auto OEMs, different utilities, different types of managed charging. For example, it might be static or dynamic managed charging and optimization. But what we have heard is that it's now time to really figure out how we scale this. And we need to move past the kind of one-off pilots to actually scaling. And, you know, I won't walk through all of this, but you see here that we've, you know, one of the key points is, again, with that customer-centric mindset, friction. How do we minimize friction as much as possible, create a seamless process? In order to do that, these kind of giants of industry need to get together along with you know, the other key stakeholders, regulators, you know, the government, et cetera. Everybody has a role to play to harmonize this, right? And make it simple for all of our collective customers and constituents. So bottom line is the issue is in the absence of standardized, automated, customer-centric managed charging approaches, we're going to really have challenges scaling, which then doesn't allow us to, you know, rely on managed charging as a tool to help defray certain costs or, you know, more efficiently utilize the power grid in the US. So proposed solution, develop a common communication protocol and implement it at scale. Called it to action. We would like to form a consortium of key stakeholders. I think this, you know, is something that could go quick, could be stood up quickly, including, you know, auto OEMs, utilities, applicable industry standards organizations, EV service providers, and others. You could think about, you know, again, there's a variety of entities that would need to be involved, but it would be led by DOE to develop standard data requirements and communication protocols among the key parties that we can really see we have some level of consensus buy-in to allow scaling. And during this effort, we think that we can, you know, look at where are gaps, where are limitations, what types of funding sources would we need, and you know, proceed to have this consortium work together, tackle this challenge, and deliver, you know, a result that can be scaled and deployed, across the nation. So I will pause there and open it up for questions and see if anybody else on my other subcommittee members want to jump in with anything as well.
Thank you, Nadia, and thanks to the subcommittee. We have John and then Ruth.
Okay, great. So this is Nadia, as you've heard me say before in our subcommittee chair meetings, this is really important work, and I commend you for this. I want to focus on the second recommendation, not because it's more important than the first, but because it is something that the auto industry is very, very focused on. Like if you think about it, just quick, if you think about the auto industry and electrical utilities, I mean, frankly, it used to be back from the beginnings of our industries together, it used to be, the utilities bought, trucks and cars from the auto industry, and the auto industry bought power from the electrical utilities. Now there is this incredible convergence, and it's a technology convergence, and it's frankly, a mutual opportunity to support and to respond to demand growth, right? And so it's really, really, really important. Vehicle grid integration is, managed charging is part of it. And I would sort of encourage us, as we use managed charging as you described it, a near-term example to grow from pilot to reality, that we also look for other opportunities, especially with public service and public utility commissions, to start to, address things, like rates and other tariffs, other things that can support vehicle grid integration. So I think this is crucially important. I would just mention or remind, I know you know this, but just to remind the rest of the working group and others that, I know DOE has done work in this area. The Auto Industry Alliance for Automotive Innovation released a white paper over the summer called Vehicle Grid Integration that supports this recommendation specifically and other recommendations in the vehicle grid integration space. So we're ready to help with this, whether it's a consortium or joint approaches to the regulators. We're ready to support this work, because in my last comment, whether you're looking at the 80% of EV customers who currently charge at home, or you're looking at the need to develop fast charging, I'll say to Sharky's point, as opposed to calling it level 3 or DC fast charging, it's going to be really important that we have customer-centric business models that support the development of a really positive, cost-effective charging experience.
Thanks, John. Ruth and then Dean.
Perfect. I got my unmute done here. No, Nadia, first of all, I think both recommendations are spot on, because when I talk with customers of mine, the two topics I always get back is speed of regulation. Is there any way to accelerate this? And then even if that was addressed, the need for some form of funding, because the utilities are not necessarily ready to step up without confirmed demand and takeoff agreements. So I think tackling both in unison, it will go a long way. On the second topic, one thought, I'm totally with the proposed approach here, because I think managed charging can alleviate a lot of the strain on the grid that we experience today. What I would also keep in the back of the head is recommendations around and requirements and standards around bidirectional charging, because the next step after managed charging is feeding back into the grid to alleviate short-term load concerns and maybe open up revenue generation opportunities for the consumer. So I'm like, while that work happens, I'm like, maybe there's a way to tackle both. I'm like in unison and accelerate the whole process a little bit. And by the way, I'm like on both topics, if there's anything we can do from a Siemens perspective to educate people on technology and what's currently available out there, I'm happy to arrange that. And would love to be part of the stakeholder conversation. So, because I think charging infrastructure, grid software, things like that need to be an integral part of either one.
Thank you, Ruth. Dean.
Thank you. Real quick question, a commentary about medium duty, heavy duty. Obviously, if you have a depot level charging, you could do managed charging and figure out when trucks need to be charged to optimize or reduce the load on the grid. But when you confuse it or make it more complicated and you say truck drivers have a certain operational cycle, they don't have a choice when to charge, it makes it much more challenging. And maybe we could look at supporting distributed energy resources or microgrids or some type of local power that could help either store power or get power from wind or solar so that is stored so that some of these high powered requirements are not going to hit the grid at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Great, thank you. Michael, and then I'll pause for the subcommittee to respond to some of these as well. Michael?
I was actually going to respond to Dean's last comment. Maybe while I'm trying to talk, I'll just finish real quick. No, I think, Dean, that is a good point. We could take this and kind of have almost two types of recommendations. The broad point of how do you manage load to the grid, keep costs down for all ratepayers. One way, when you're looking at the light duty, a lot of dispersed load, like this managed charging, we kind of said fast charging by definition. People need it fast, so they're really not looking to load change. But then depot charging is much more like there's a different type of managed charging in there that's somewhat within the depot, microgridding, all those things you said, maybe somewhat back to the grid. We've thought about those as two separate use cases, two different technical solutions, two different approaches, but it might be we could possibly address both of those. Just kind of say there's an A and a B case here.
Great, thank you. Other responses to what you've heard, other things to add on these two recommendations? We've talked a bit about managed charging, and there's, as a reminder, the first one on the infrastructure investments. So Nadia, anything you want to add first?
Yeah, appreciate all the comments and feedback, good points. I will say on managed charging, we thought about exactly like there's the whole spectrum, right? There's the very basic, you can think even potentially some might argue rate design, feeds into that all the way up to, vehicle to X, so to speak. And what we were thinking is just maybe as a first step, as we've been talking about in building momentum, we get some basic standards and agreement and alignment, while keeping in mind that the future, technology is changing, regulations are changing, all kinds of things, right? Industry is innovating on all sides. How do we try to create something that is a foundation from which we can build? Because I do think the other topics are developing and they've got, all kinds of tentacles for some are easy, some are more challenging. But that was the approach we were thinking, is like, let's get something where we can kind of just stop having to be in pilot mode. Because a piece of this is also going to be what level of industry standard is going to be acceptable, that if you're a co-op or a muni or a large investor-owned utility, you can go to your regulators and there's buy-in that says, yes, we accept this. We're not going to ask for something different or more, because then, we know that can impact the ability to scale, for example. Or if the auto industry is if there's alignment there. John, I see you have your hand up. I'll stop here in a second, but kind of get a baseline, if that makes sense, a foundation from which to build.
Yeah, sorry, I think all of that makes sense. I would just, as important foundationally as the technical work is, as you started, or as you mentioned earlier in your presentation, I think the customer has to have skin in the game, right? The customer has to see the value of charging, and the ratepayer has to see the value of EVs to the grid, right? And so that's the, like, I just want us to not lose sight of the fact, you know, that a sizable fleet of EVs supports the grid, and that therefore there should be value to customers who are going to charge, whether they're charging at home or they're charging on the go. Because that's the big missing piece right now.
Thank you for that. And thanks everybody for your comments. Anything else on the grid integration recommendations right now?
Oh, I should note, Danielle couldn't make it today, but she did send some comments. You know, she's with NARUC. And they're actually having a conference right now. So one thing I'll just note for the record, and we'll discuss it, there was a desire, I think she got some feedback recently, to potentially remove the word proactive from the first recommendation. And I'm just looking for her comments. I don't know if any of the other team members have them. I'll pull them up. But I will say that I think that that's going to require us to have some additional comment, you know, discussion, and probably from even inside the grid integration subcommittee. We did vote to move these forward today, but I think we're going to need to have some additional discussions. So I will note that. That's late breaking news from the grid integration. You know, we have our own late breaking news here.
I will say, for those that aren't interested, I mean, this first one is like kind of it's a big idea. It's a game changing thing, which means it'll be hard to do and all of that, but it addresses, it kind of puts the finger on, this is a challenge. I don't know how it happens, but this is kind of what does need to happen in some way, shape, or form. And it will take multiple people coming together to make it happen, and some really innovative thinking. And you can just see, because the minute you say proactive, you know, there's concern about that. Naturally so, rightly so, but it's also what does need to happen in some ways to solve the problem.
Yeah, I think you're right. We did not shy away from some of the controversial topics. We just kind of dove in knowing that this would do that. So the request was to update the title to reduce risk of infrastructure investments and remove the word proactive from the text throughout. So that was a request, and we'll take that back in the subcommittee and work, you know, feed that in. Just wanted to share that, since I know Danielle couldn't make it today for good reason, because she's I think on a panel or moderating a panel at NARUC.
Great. Okay, thanks everybody for this great discussion. So we'll revisit the 9 recommendations in total after our public comment period, and we'll discuss some next steps. We already just heard from Nadia. That group will want to continue to iterate on theirs. But first, let's turn it over to the part of our agenda where we open it up for public comment. So I will stop sharing. Great. Thank you. So at this time, we're going to open up the meeting to hear public comments. For those in the public who would like to participate, please raise your hand in the Zoom app using the icon within the reactions icon area. Each individual will have 2 minutes to share their comments. And please refrain from asking questions of the working group. When I call your name, you can unmute yourself and turn your video on if you'd like. And if we're unable to get to everyone, we just want to remind you that you can submit written statements to the working group's email address, which is evwg@ee.doe.gov, or via mail to Dr. Rachel Mueller, as described in our Federal Register notice. And those instructions will also be in the chat pod here in our Zoom meeting. Any statements received before November 23rd will be included in the meeting notes to be posted on our website in the future. Okay, so I'm going to look at our participant list, and if there are any members of the public who would like to provide a comment, please raise your hand now. Okay, we'll start. Oh, I saw a hand and then it went away. Anyone who would like to provide a public comment at this time? Okay. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself and begin?
Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Paul Verchinsky. I'm with the Maryland Zero Emissions Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council. We were established by the Maryland General Assembly in 2012. So we've been at this for like 12 years already. I'm the member that represents the public. So you were talking about the consumers, and that resonates with me. Just a few comments. Your issues that you're dealing with are the common issues that ZVIC has been wrestling with for a good number of years. I would refer you to something that we just published on November the 1st. It's the Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment Work Group that was put together by the Public Service Commission, and it's a result of Senate Bill 951, and it deals with some of the issues that you're already trying to deal with. The biggest one being, at least for us right now, because I have the same problem with this, is reliability and uptime, and the fact that it's not doing so well out there. So what do we need as guardrails for folks? I understand your view of trying to make people do this voluntarily, but we've been at this for over a decade now, and that is not going so well. The only network out there that's reliable, unfortunately, is the Tesla network. The rest of them are in various stages of disrepair, unreliability, etc. So we're attempting, at least in Maryland, to set up some guardrails and requirements for EVSEs generally. I think that that's a good way to go. It's a recommendation I would make to your groups that, right now, EVSEs are like the Wild West in terms of all these networks, people like Blink who were here and that are no longer here. And what do we do with all those chargers that now are unsupported? So anyway, those are my comments. If anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Paul. We appreciate your comment. Are there other members? Tom, can you please come off mute and introduce yourself?
Hey, I don't know how I can turn my camera here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Well, I just wanted to thank you guys. It's been very helpful. I'm building a medium and heavy duty charging depot over in California. It's just been helpful to hear you guys specifically from the medium duty and heavy duty group on how to think about approaching this from the landowner's perspective. So just wanted to say that I appreciate the work that you guys have done, and looking forward to attending the rest of the sessions for the rest of the month. So yeah, I just want to let you guys know that it's the work is awesome to see, and we will keep moving the business that we see here.
Great. Thank you very much for your comment. At this time, are there any other members of the public who would like to share a comment? Okay. Seeing none, we will close our comment period. Thank you for those who did comment, and instructions are also in the chat if you choose to submit a comment. Now we will turn over to our voting discussion. I'll be able to share my screen, and Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, thanks, Rachel. And thank you all the subcommittee members for participating in the public for their comments. Rich discussion today, 9 recommendations. My hope is that we can just go through each recommendation and take a vote on it if we think it's ready, and if we don't think it's ready, and the subcommittee chairs can say whether or not they think they're ready for a vote. Take a vote. If we get a majority of the folks from the committee, which today will be, I believe, 13 out of the 14 committee members that are attending, we'll need to vote yes. We can then kind of advance it and work on getting it all packaged into, you know, a consistent format. If we vote no, or if something's not ready, then we can we'll take it back, and the subcommittees can work on refining the recommendations based on the comments they got today. So my proposal would be we kind of start with the EV in the order that we went. So the charging network subcommittee, and the first one, the EV charging public education and awareness campaign. Are we ready to take a vote on that? Okay, so in the interest of making it easy to count, or easier to count rather, would it be easiest to, it might be easiest to just count the nays first, since we only need to get to 2. So are there any nays?
You've got a hand up or 2 there.
Yes. John.
Sorry, no, sorry. I thought we were voting by hands up. I've withdrawn my hand. I'm going back to Scott in the regular order. Apologies.
Okay. So I don't know what the inverse of vote by acclamation is, but we can do an inverse vote by acclamation. So if anybody objects to voting to passing this through, raise your hand. And in the event we see no hands raised, we will move it forward as approved.
Scott, just a quick clarification. We vote to move it forward, but it still will be tweaked based on comments, correct?
The tweaking will be primarily in packaging. Is there specific language that you would like to see changed? And if so, then we can take it and refine that language, or the subcommittee can take it, refine that language, and bring it back for a vote, both Wednesday and Friday of next week.
So maybe, Scott, just to make sure I understand and clarify. We heard some feedback today. I think Rachel's taking some good notes on the side of some of those. So this would be people agree with, given the, I think you're asking with what was presented plus the comments made, basically move it forward, try to incorporate the comments made, package them up, in a similar way, and then bring it back as a final form there'll be a final vote, it sounds like, right?
Yes, we can. If there are things that need comments, then we can do that. If there are things that none of the substantive or none of the wordsmithing needs to occur, then we can just advance those or approve those as fully recommended. So this one does have some comments. I guess I would ask if there is a desire to incorporate those comments into the recommendation as writing, or just kind of keep them as a part of the record. And also to the extent that there's a dissenting opinion on something that is approved, if somebody chooses to vote no, they can draft a dissent explaining why. So would we like to take a vote on this, or John, do you want to take the comments that have been received and try to incorporate them into a final?
I think the comments are very easy to accommodate. I don't see any comments that are challenging. So I mean,
Okay.
I would just say, we should vote on whether the sense of this committee is that we should have a public education campaign on light duty charging and how it works and how easy it is. And if that's the case, we'll finalize it.
Agree.
I concur with John.
I concur with John.
Okay, excellent. Does anybody not concur? Okay, sounds like the ayes have it. Let's go to the next one. Creating an EV charging station competition to the top. John, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we put it to a vote for the group?
So the one substantive comment that was made by a number of people, I think Nadia and Michael specifically, was the idea of the entity that does the, for lack of a better term, the awarding of the prize. We left that purposely open because we didn't want to go that far. If in fact this isn't sort of a place we want to go as a full committee. So I guess what I would suggest here is that you can do one of two things. You can say, finish that work and we can come back to you, or you can say, give us a sense of the group. And if this is something you want us to complete, that would be the next obvious and tangible step. And so we'd come back to you with this built out with the identification of an entity that would be awarding the prize. I put prize in quotes.
And if I could make a comment on that, on John's, and maybe refine his suggestion, because I think there's a piece of ground in between those two, which is to generically describe that entity without specifically picking it. That's what I was trying to do in my comment earlier, to say it someone with brand value in the marketplace. So I don't know, John, if you want to just leave it as either, we figure out exactly who now or not touch it at all. But I think we could probably put some meat on it and say it needs to be someone recognized in the market and something like along those lines.
Sharkey?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand the delineation here that John's making. So we're encouraging the joint office to develop a program, or no?
I'm sorry. Yeah. What I was talking about is that we would identify what's missing in this proposal is an entity that would award whatever it happens to be. I'm calling it the prize in quotes, the stars, the thumbs up, or whatever it happens to be, right? In my view, I think based on I shouldn't say in my view, based on the conversations we've had, and Andy was touching on this, it wouldn't be the joint office. It would be some other entity, some entity that has, this does not to suggest that the joint office doesn't have credibility. It does, but not necessarily in this space. Some entity that would be seen as a credible arbiter of the experience. And so that's the work we left undone, as you know, Sharkey. And so what I'm suggesting is we would come back with either Andy's point, which is these are the principles that we would use to identify the entity, or we'd come back with the entity itself. I kind of like Andy's approach because it gives the committee another whack at this before we actually choose one. So maybe that's the right way to think about it.
So I guess where I was heading with that is, so I also agree with Andy's approach. I guess what I'm thinking about is also perhaps a little more time will shed some additional light on how the incoming administration wants to look at this sort of stuff. And I guess, part of our purview here is figuring out what people are actually willing to go for. And I think we need to have some more conversations to get a better understanding of that.
Okay, so in the interest of time, it sounds like this one is going to get worked on a little bit over the next couple of days to to address the issues that Andy, Sharkey, and John raised. And so let's now move to the medium and heavy duty. Or though, Andy, I see your hand is still up, and I'm not sure if that's to make an additional comment or a standing vote. Nope, you're muted.
Operator error, sorry.
Yep, you got it. Okay, medium and heavy duty subcommittee recommendations. And I believe this was one that had 5. So let's, I believe, kind of talk through this first one, the EV public education and awareness campaign. Do we believe this is ready to bring to a vote? And I will leave it to Dean to
Yeah, so echoing John's comment earlier, I think these suggestions that we have for the document can be easily incorporated. I think I should add a couple like existing tools that exist out there and who the audience is, a little bit clarifying. But I think it's ready for a vote with the additions or the incorporation of the comments.
Nadia.
So question, who would do the, I see the audience, but who would create the public? I mean, I think it sounds like the first one, the click it or ticket, that sounds like that's kind of a government and industry partnership. One thing that's open in my mind is like, who is going to fund this or collaborate on the content?
I'll leave some of this open to my subcommittee members, but my answer to this would be, and I'll take it back to my subcommittee, great question, would be also a government and industry collaboration.
Got it. I think that's an important clarification of like how, if it would be a myth busting similar to one from the last subcommittee. I think that's an important clarification.
Excellent. So it sounds like there's a little bit of clarification that still needs to be done on this, on that point. And Dean, we perhaps can work on that between now and Wednesday. Do we want to go to the next item? Broad industry engagement on market segmentation and medium heavy duty classifications. Dean, do you want to, is there anything that you heard that that you think needs to be incorporated into this recommendation, or is it ready to bring to a vote?
Yeah, this one I think is pretty clear cut. I think this one could be brought to a vote, noting that number 3 probably will be merged with Nadia's group. So just knocking out 2 at once.
Okay, gotcha. So number 2, ready to vote on. Number 3, going to work with Nadia's group. Can we get a vote on item number 2? Is there anybody that objects to approving this recommendation? By show of hands. Okay. I'm going to wait just one. Okay. I think everybody's had time to work their Zoom. So approved. Excellent. Okay, let's go to number 4. Best practices. Dean, is there anything in this that you heard that requires updating the recommendation that you're making, or do you believe that it is ready to bring to a vote?
So the one question that I heard that needs to be clarified is, again, is who is the audience that you're trying to reach and at what level? So we can go through and clarify this one. I think this one deserves a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of clarity on what you're trying to get to, and then bring it back.
Okay, excellent. And then number 5.
I think number 5 is, again, for me, pretty clear, but I want to open it up to everybody. But promoting research, I think it's pretty clear.
I just had something on 4. I think the same, Dean, it sounds like a great clarification. I would just add the same thing of like, who is going to be involved in putting that together? It's the same comment as the first one.
Okay, so 4 we will refine, and then 5, is this, so Dean, you'd like to bring this to a vote?
Yes.
So open it up for the group to vote. Again, if there's any objections, let's raise our hand. Otherwise, we'll deem not raising your hand as an approval. Okay. Oh, Nadia.
So many questions, but
Okay.
this one, I like the concept. I guess the other question is, what do we mean by promote research? Like, is that, you know what I'm saying? Like, so for example, on the grid, on the managed charging one, we were thinking about like an actual convening a group of the stakeholders. DOE would do that in what we had suggested, but like what do we mean by promote research, I guess?
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, and I agree it's not actionable. So promoting research is a broad-based statement that's really hard to disagree with in general. But so I would like to add some actionable items on here. So maybe I'll take that back also, Scott. It's not like we have to vote today on this, but we can take it back and say, hey, all right, you're going to promote research and you're going to put it out there that we love research, but in what capacity?
And maybe even just clarifying, like if it's just additional studies or, you know, does the government play a role there? Is it industry? Is it all of the above? I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's be generic as it is. I just was curious about that.
And maybe a near-term, sorry, I'm speaking over someone without raising my hand. I apologize.
Yeah, Michael, you're next.
You know, I think this would be a very natural one where, I mean, the R&D research in these areas is done by federal government and by industry, and it might be just a federal, you know, we recommend that government working collaboratively with industry do .
And Rakesh.
So, you know, in the past, we had talked about putting out memos as part of the EV working group, and that to me could be one of the near-term action items. Even acknowledgement of this topic from the EV working group, assuming we have alignment on that, I think will go a long way. When we clarify, if we indeed align on that our broader goal is decarbonization, and we are technology agnostic to how we achieve decarbonization. And if we think of that, we can elaborate some cases on why a battery electric vehicle may or may not be suited for a particular application. I'm speaking medium and heavy duty here specifically, and how in other cases a hydrogen propulsion system may be more suited. So even as basic as that, a near-term action item in the form of a memo acknowledging this would be a great start. And then that could lead to other initiatives of research programs and additional collaboration that needs to take place.
Yeah, I would concur with that. And Nadia, the most interesting subjects elicit the most questions.
Excellent. So we will now move over to the grid subcommittee, and Nadia, I will leave it to you to decide whether you have any recommendations that are ready to bring to a vote, or if you want to bring them back to the subcommittee.
I think we had enough feedback on both to bring them back, but does anybody feel differently? Okay.
To bring them to a vote, you say, or to bring them back to your subcommittee?
Bring them back, sorry, to the subcommittee to take into consideration the comments received, and then come back at our next meeting. Maybe they'll be ready then. But if anybody feels like they're ready to vote now as they stand, speak now or wait till next week.
Yes, with the exception of the reduce risk comment, was there anything else that, I don't remember if there were on the last one, comments that were substantial changes? I guess I was thinking that we were kind of in the same boat as the others, like, you had a few comments to work in, but otherwise if people are comfortable voting like, yeah, we think there should be a recommendation on reducing the risk of infrastructure investments, and we should have a recommendation on managed charging in the vein that's here, maybe taking into account some of the comments.
Dean.
So I'll go quick briefly. I think number one is, again, for Nadia and I to do a little bit of interaction with the two subcommittees to say, how can we merge the two? So I think number one needs to be taken back. Number two, I would agree with Michael. I think it may be ready for a vote, but that would be up to Nadia.
John?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think too, I'm ready to express support for, you know, the managed charging recommendation. And I understand that some, just as we had with the other ones we approved, that there's some, you know, language development and specificity that need to be added for it. But I think it's an important initiative, and I think the work is really good. And so, you know, I think I'm ready to suggest that it, you know, again, subject to that honing, this is an important recommendation for the full working group to agree to.
Subcommittee members, are you, I think, oh, Cassie, I see you got your hand up.
Thanks. I was just going to say, I agree that it is important we move these forwards, but I think that it is also important that we discuss the inclusion of proactive versus not, since there were concerns about including that language. And so it may be a good idea for us to bring that back and discuss before bringing this to a vote.
Agree. So I think recommendation one, we're going to take back. The question is, are we ready for recommendation number two? And I'll say the only thing I would throw out to my fellow committee members is, are we okay with this kind of being like the MVP, you know, the foundational start, knowing that it can build upon that, but to kind of get moving? Because once you start adding things like vehicle decks and all of that, then you just get stalled out. So we wanted to start with the basics, and then there's nothing prohibiting this group from exploring next steps, but I'll pause there.
What you said.
Okay.
Okay, so.
So I think we
Nadia,
can vote on this then. I'm not hearing anybody's having massive heartburn on this, so I'd say, like, let's take it to a vote and see what happens. If it fails, we can always bring it back.
Excellent. Well, let's bring it to a vote. Again, the nays, raise your hand. And I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, seeing none, it looks like it passed. So we have 3 that have passed. We have 6 that need a little bit more work. We're running up on time, so I'm going to be real fast, which is our next committee meeting is the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern on the 20th. Between now and the 20th, the subcommittees are going to ideally get together, refine the work, get a final product that's ready for a vote. We're going to have a very similar kind of meeting where we kind of talk through those issues. If we can get to yes on those, then we'll vote on them, take them off the table. And if not, then we'll carry them forward to an additional conversation on Friday, the 22nd, which is, I believe, starting at 1 p.m. or noon Eastern time. Thank you guys very much. And I think we are at time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.